Welcome to part 3 of possibly a 4-part or possibly a 5-part series on onions and the onion family. Now, last week I said welcome to episode 2 of 3, possibly 4 parts. Well, I know it's going to be 4 parts and it may be 5 parts now. Just depends. Because this past week I found a recipe which was really wonderful for red onion soup, a kind of soup that comes from Tuscany and was apparently the favorite of Leonardo da Vinci. And I had some red onions, so I thought, okay, fine, I'll make that. But I also wanted to make my chives into a soup. And I also wanted to make garlic soup. And I found 2 very good recipes for garlic soup. And then I found a 3rd one. And so I've been making all kinds of soups. And I want to tell you, my freezer is getting pretty full of soup because I can't eat all that soup at one go. And also, it's just not quite so appetizing to eat like 3 garlic soups in a row, especially if I have to eat each one for 2 days in a row. So my freezer is pretty well stocked with soup for the next month. So now my dilemma is what to start with. And so I've decided that I'm going to treat today as the first of 2 in a mini series, I guess. This one on red onion soup and on chive soup, and then next week I will give you my long involved saga on garlic soup. So let's get cooking. So, if you've been following my little onion family saga for any length of time, you'll know that 2 weeks ago I went to the market and stocked up on everything I could find in the onion family. And that was a lot. My fridge was full with chives and spring onions and scallions and garlic and leeks and onions. Although I didn't put the onions in the fridge, they could just stay out. But I bought yellow onions and red onions. And at the time, I was thinking, well, I might as well have red onions because I'll use them for something. But then I got into the practice of making French onion soup and then French leek soup and then French green onion soup. And so the next step could have been French red onion soup. But I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that because caramelized red onions would probably be very similar to caramelized yellow onions. So kind of what's the point? Well, then I discovered Carabaccia, which is a Tuscan soup, a very old Tuscan soup, certainly from the Renaissance, maybe earlier, because it was Leonardo's favorite. And it's made with red onions. But here's the great part. The red onions are not caramelized. And that is a very, very difficult process. So let me take you through that. First, we have to peel and slice the red onions, and then put them in a fair amount of olive oil on low heat, or low to medium heat, because what you want to do is you want to soften them and cook them very gently. This process takes between 40 minutes to an hour. You want to cook them very, very, very gently and not caramelize them. So here is the process in motion. I'm cooking them very slowly, but unfortunately sometimes I had to raise the heat a little bit because they weren't doing anything. They were just sitting there and looking back at me. So I had to raise the heat a little time, and then sometimes I turned the heat off or just let the residual heat cook them, and on and on and on and on. But what happens is eventually they become really soft but not caramelized, and then you can add broth. But the traditional recipe calls for the addition of sage as well. Now, that's very interesting, because if you're in any way familiar with English cooking, you'll know about sage and onion stuffing. Sage and onion are like Castor and Pollux, the great twins of cooking for me. Oh, one of the twins. So sage and onion go together very well. So put some sage into your broth when you're cooking up the soup. And some people, and I don't know whether this is traditional or not, but I didn't do it, some people add cinnamon at this point as well. I didn't add cinnamon because I didn't think that it married well with the sage and onion, but you can do that. And then you can also add a little bit of wine vinegar, just because the red onions, by the time you've cooked them down this far, are really, really quite sweet. And so a little bit of vinegar just cuts that sweetness. And that's another reason that I wouldn't use the cinnamon either, because the cinnamon is a sweet spice and it would add sweetness. So it's red onion and sage soup. Wonderful. So now that I've cooked the soup down, I usually cook for about 35-40 minutes when I'm doing these onion soups, so I did the same. And I could refrigerate it overnight, which I also did. And then next day I made up the finished soup. Now the recipe that I saw called for putting croutons and Parmesan cheese on top of the soup, same way as with French onion soup. But that is not traditional, so I'm doing it here in the traditional way. First of all, make some Italian or French bread roundels and toast them. I toasted them here in the skillet, which is also traditional. You can use a toaster if you want to, but I used olive oil and toasted them in the skillet. Put them in a bowl, add some grated Parmesan cheese on top, and then pour in the hot soup. That's the traditional way of doing it, not the other way around like the French onion soup. And then what happens is that the cheese melts all gooey and nice, and the bread absorbs all of the broth, and then put in your spoon and dip out some bread and some cheese and some red onion Carabaccia. Absolutely delicious. So now I turned my attention to the chives, and they were nice looking chives with some flower buds on top, nice bundle. So I thought I would make a soup out of them using exactly the same method that I used for the green onions, namely chop them up, put them in water, and simmer them. Can't get much simpler than that. So that's exactly what I did. I chopped them up and I simmered them for maybe about 25-35 minutes, and then taste. And again, quite delicious. A very subtle flavor, but very nice. A kind of consomme, if you like. And I could have done various things with it. But what I chose to do, just on a whim, because I had a lot of French bread from other things that I was doing, including garlic soup, which I will get to next time, I added some bread into the simmering broth, let it soak up some of the juices, and then had a nice luncheon. So there's 2 more soups from the onion family, and I'm going to go on to garlic soup next time, and I've got 3 garlic soups that I'm going to prepare for you, all very, very different, all wonderful, and they do use an awful lot of garlic, but it's no more garlicky tasting than anything else with garlic in, like olive oil and garlic on linguine, or garlic in roast lamb. I mean, it's not really overpowering. But anyway, we'll get to them next time. Meanwhile, if you like my cooking, subscribe, and I will see you next time.